Don't forget that. Hello, everyone. My name is Alaina G. Levine. I'm president of Quantum Success Solutions. I'm a professional speaker, a STEM career coach, and a science writer, and the author of the book, Create Your Unicorn Career. And I am really excited because today, guess what we're talking about? We're talking about one of the most anticipated and requested topics when it comes to astronomers exploring the multiverse of careers, and that, of course, is data science. We've assembled an all-star panel today of amazing, talented astronomers turned data scientists and data science professionals, and you will have the opportunity to hear from all of them. We are going to be taking your questions throughout the whole session. I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A. If you have a question, put it in the Q&A panel of your webinar. And in the chat, we are going to be posting a number of resources, and immediately you're going to start to see all of our LinkedIn profiles, and you're welcome to connect with all of us. In fact, we encourage you to do so that you can be kept apprised of all of the different opportunities in data science, including a really fun, #spoiler alert, resource that we're going to premiere at the end of this session. It's going to be really exciting, and I'm super excited. Can you tell? Ladies and gentlemen and friends around the multiverse, allow me to introduce our panel. We're going to start by introducing each person, and they're going to get a chance to tell you a little bit about their career journey, their origin story, what they do in data science, and I have a great question. What exactly is data science? Because I know some of you are curious and maybe confused about what that actually encompasses. Let's start with my good friend, Eva Noyola. No, excuse me, I butchered that. I am so sorry. Eva Noyola. Eva is most recently a data scientist with ZenBusiness. Welcome, Eva. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your career journey, and what is data science, please?
Okay, so as quickly as I can, I got a PhD at the University of Texas in Austin, and I actually did stay in science for a long time. I had a postdoc in Germany and another postdoc in Mexico, and then I came back and worked as a research associate again in Texas. I came back to my alma mater and worked for several years until the road of the NSF grants, as wonderful and as it was and generous to me, I decided that I was no longer super happy to stay in that path. So that's when I decided to do a transition to data science. So the first thing I did, part of the issue is that the pandemic hit around that time when I decided to do my transition. So that put a damper on things because I have children. But, I took a lot of self-training on my own at home. Took a bunch of courses about mostly machine learning. And after that, it's that road of applying for jobs. So eventually I got a job. I have to say it was through my network, and my network was a former astronomer. So that's very common. That was the case for me. I got a job as part of the data science group in ZenBusiness, which is a good size startup in Austin, Texas. So as for the question of what is data science, I tend to like the more generous definition. I would say a basic requirement for data science to be called as such is that you work with models of some sort. I think that's the one thing that makes it a little different to data analysis, that you have to model your data in some shape or form. That's what qualifies. But again, there's a lot of very serious analytics that goes into that, and I think that's where we scientists excel. So I would say that it is creating models, but with a fair amount of data analytics on the side, I guess, or attached to it. So
thank you
yeah,
so much.
I guess.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's so interesting to hear a little bit about your journey, and we're going to hear even more in just a few moments. But thanks for that introduction. It really seems to me that data science was truly made for astronomers. Like, this is the most natural progression that could possibly happen in career development. So I'm excited to hear from the rest of you, as well as more from you, Eva, about how we can explore and build our careers in this space. Joseph Ahern, he is with an organization called PACCAR. Joseph, tell us a little bit about your career journey, your origin story, and what data science means to you, please.
Thanks, Alaina. Yeah. I started out on a trajectory where I studied some humanities and philosophy, and then decided to switch over to a STEM career. And I did a physics bachelor's, and then continued on. I wanted to do more like astrophysics, astronomy, but it was recommended to me to do physics because it would open up to more opportunities later on. So I followed that advice, and then I did a physics PhD next at the University of Idaho, and I just finished that last year. And so as I was exploring my options for after my PhD, I was applying to postdocs, but I was also considering industry positions. And then in one moment, I just kind of realized that I also have a family and I want to support them. And the best thing to do, because it looks like some postdoc positions were not going to be as promising, even though I would like to do that work. It seemed that a career in industry was the next step for me. I'm not closing the door to returning to academia later, but it seemed that data scientist was the position with the most overlap with my previous experience, especially during grad school. And so it made the most sense to attempt that. And I was fortunate enough to find a position. I had my interview for it the day before my graduation. And so it was perfect timing. And I've been working at PACCAR for about a year now. They are a company that's been around for over 100 years and are currently in the trucking industry with Kenworth and Peterbilt. Those are two of their divisions in North America that are more well known. It's about 30% of the market for large trucks. Data science I agree with Eva that some machine learning model needs to be involved in some way for it to be data scientist position. But there's a lot of programming work that is involved besides that, like leading up to making the model. And there's also a lot of statistics knowledge that's required. I've heard that, and I agree with this, that a data scientist knows more statistics than a computer scientist and knows more computer science than a statistician, but probably less than the professionals in each. So it's kind of a hybrid sort of position. And it's been pretty fun so far.
I love it. And congrats on your success as well, Joseph. You know, the thing that we're going to hear a lot about today is the diversity of industries and organizations that hire data scientists. So far, we've heard of two industries. You know, I wasn't even thinking about how the transportation industry, of course, needs data scientists and data science expertise and the type of rugged, robust modeling and simulation and data analysis skills that you get from astronomy, astrophysics, and cosmology. So again, it's just really exciting about the different career paths that somebody with this background can pursue. And it also goes to say that there's a lot of opportunity to find industries and organizations that are truly aligned with what your interests are. You are not limited in that. Jeffrey Silverman and I have worked together on panels before. Jeffrey, hello, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. We want to hear about your career path, your origin story, and what you do and what you've done as a data scientist. You've been a manager with Zoom, so thank you for all of your technology. I appreciate it. But tell us a little bit about yourself and what is data science to you, please?
Yeah, for sure. I got a PhD in astrophysics at UC Berkeley, doing spectroscopy of supernova for the most part. After that, I got an NSF postdoc and went to the University of Texas at Austin. That's actually where I met Eva initially, and did research there for a few years. And then when that was up, realized that the academic path wasn't for me. So I got into the Insight Data Science program, which was a sort of boot camp / placement program at the time. Did that for just a couple of months. It was a pretty short program. And from there, got my first job in the tech industry. So I was a data scientist at a relatively small TV analytics startup based in San Francisco called Samba TV. There I leveled up, and that's where I first became a manager and then director of data science and analytics, led a variety of teams, did a variety of projects there. After 5 years at Samba, I decided I was up for a change. So I started looking at for new jobs. Perhaps a first distinction, I mean, there's plenty of distinctions between tech industry and academia, but one I'll explicitly point out here is I had a nice paying, interesting job, but I kind of wanted to work on something different. So I made the decision to not move. I stayed in the SF Bay area. I got to make more money. I got to do something totally different at a totally different company. Kind of very opposite of a lot of academic paths where your funding runs out, you got to move somewhere, you got to go find something new. And it's hard to often to switch, subfields within astronomy. So that's where I got my job at Zoom. So I was a senior manager of advanced analytics at Zoom for a little bit over a year, running a couple of different teams, supporting a few different parts of the Zoom ecosystem and company. Zoom, like many other big tech companies, went through some major layoffs over the last few months. So I was actually let go from Zoom back in February. And so I took a couple months off. There was a nice severance package. I had savings because there was, decent salaries at these places I've worked. So I didn't stress too much about it. Wasn't super fun to get laid off, but I certainly was not as worried as I was in academia when you miss one paycheck and you may not be able to pay rent. So I've been looking for jobs over the last couple of months. I actually got married about 3 months ago. So that was fun. I got to take time off while I was doing our wedding planning final steps. So that was kind of cool. And am interviewing now. So in the pipeline, waiting for some final decisions from a couple companies, in the middle of the interview process with a couple of companies. And actually later this afternoon, I have a phone call with a recruiter. So at the very beginning stage of a couple of companies as well. So mostly looking at sort of director and senior manager jobs, but also what are known as IC, individual contributor jobs. So this is, you don't have people directly reporting to you. It's not the manager side of the business, but there's, in those senior IC positions, there's a lot of mentorship. So I'm still going to be working with, more junior folks, less experienced folks, still going to, have a lot of say in strategy and planning, even if, I'm not a manager, director, other kind of managerial position. So I can certainly talk to the current job market and interviewing and stuff like that as well. And then finally, what do I think? How would I define data science? I mean, I snickered when Alaina said this earlier, because my usual joke is if you ask 10 data scientists to define data science, you'll get 20 answers. So yes, there's a lot of different opinions. I hold a very broad view of the term data science. I don't think it needs to involve modeling. I definitely have been a data scientist and have people with that title that, did mostly analytics, which is sort of, looking at the numbers themselves. Maybe there's some forecasting or fitting a straight line to some data points, which I know almost every astrophysicist has done at some point or another. And in some sense, that is modeling. It's, I think a very broad term. And I think the best way that I like to define it, like really have to put a definition to it, is, you're using numbers, often referred to as data, to find an interesting result, right? It's really sort of signal above the noise. And that is the fundamental definition. There are many tools to do that. There's many types of data to do that. There's many things you can do with that signal once you find it. There's many ways to look for signal above noise. All those things, there's tons of dimensions of that make up the entire big data career space: data science, data analytics, data engineering, machine learning engineering, business insights. All of those are titles that I've put under this big umbrella. And so that's my somewhat vague, I guess, definition of data science.
Well, and it's so useful to hear all of you to share how different data science is defined. And I love that. That's that joke about how to, if you ask all these different data scientists, you'll get so many different answers. That's my understanding too. But that's so relevant because astronomers and astrophysicists and cosmologists are trained and educated in, yes, a basic fundamental set of skills and problems that they're solving, but they also are unique. They all have their own interests. They all have their own things that they really lean on, that they enjoy. And so it sounds like in data science, quote unquote, in data science career paths, this is something that you can really lean into. You can lean into what you enjoy. Would that be fair to say, Jeffrey?
Yeah, definitely. I think, not only exactly what you're saying, that there's that fundamental skill set, and then there's, everybody's unique and has their area of expertise that can be applied in industry and big data careers. But I think another thing that academics tend to learn, undergrad through, postdoc and professor even, is how to pick up new skills, how to learn a new topic quickly, how to do a literature search and understand something that you may not have experience with, right? I'm guessing Joseph didn't know a lot about trucking before he started working for PACCAR. PACCAR. I did not know much at all about TV advertising and TV commercials. I watched a lot of TV and still do, but before I worked at Samba TV, and I learned a lot very quickly. And academics who do research, right? Research is a question no one's answered, and you got to figure out how to answer it. That's a lot of what's done, to pick up these new skills or to, add to that toolbox that each of us has going into these careers and these new spaces.
We're already getting so many questions, and keep them coming, folks. We want to hear from you. But I want to ask you, since you're talking about skills, Jeffrey, I would like to ask Eva and Joseph a little bit about what skills have really served you well. And I'd love to hear both what technical skills have served you well in the tasks and in the career job getting process, but also what business skills, what other communications and other types of professional skills have helped you. Eva, what did you notice helped you?
So one that I think every astronomer is ever faced with, even the theoreticians, although maybe less than observers, but dirty data. You get so much dirty data that you need to really understand super well and get in a shape that can be used. That's pretty much every astronomer that went through a PhD will have that skill very well developed, for example. So dealing with cleaning data. One that, for example, for me, I was surprised how much is sought after and not everybody has is the one that has to do with documentation and reporting, being able to figure out the exact definition of things or the exact processes of things and being able to put them in written in a way that anybody can understand or anybody that needs to understand them can do it. That is something that we are trained to do because, sometimes you're thrown into a telescope that was built in the 50s and there's barely 3 pages, things like that. You really need to learn to use a huge variety of systems. So we are actually good at that, at both following documentation, producing documentation of processes or things like that, and training or either learning or training ourselves to do things or passing that knowledge along to other people that may have it. So that's something that we in astronomy have. I guess switching between projects, that's one that most people during a PhD will have fingers in several pies, and that happens a lot in the industry. Not everybody, but some people need to pivot quickly from one thing to the next. So that's another one. Those are the 3 I can think of right now, but please, I want to hear from the others.
And it's so interesting to hear about the communication skills, because I think oftentimes, I'm a career coach, and by the way, and Ruth, if you could throw this into the chat, the part of your benefit as a member of AAS is you can book time with me to actually do a career consultation. So if you're welcome to do that, you can click on that. And one of the biggest questions I get, and one of the biggest concerns I see when I look at people's CVs who are shifting into industry roles, is they undermarket themselves. They don't tell the full extent of their skills, their abilities, their talents. And you just described, Eva, like, for example, the ability to communicate the complex messages to different stakeholders, to be able to distill, to be able to project manage and jump from project to project. That is value, folks. That is value. That's what gets you a job, and that's what keeps you employed and keeps you successful in this business. And you just described it, Eva, so I'm so glad you did that. Joseph, what about you? What skills have been very helpful to you in this space?
For me, to start with the technical skill, I would say just programming, and my organization uses Python, and I think most probably do. But with data science, we're also expected to know some SQL, and that's something that I had no experience with a year and a half ago when I started my job search. But that's something that can be learned in a few weeks if you dedicate yourself to it. And I'm not like fluent in it, but I can read it and understand what's going on. And that was good enough for me in the interview. And related to that, I think documentation is big as well. And in my position, both now and also when I was a grad student, I had opportunities to look at code that other people had written, but not documented. And so just being able to try to understand what's going on and then document it for the future so that somebody else doesn't have the same issue as you, that has a lot of value and can save a lot of time. So those are 2 things. And then also I've just been finding that, yeah, I agree, communication, but in the sense of like when you're presenting to stakeholders who are not data scientists, who are not like number people necessarily, you need to be able to say what's important in different words than the words you use to talk about it with your manager. So that's been something I'm still working on, but I realize how important it is.
And so it's translation, right? Being
Yes.
able to translate it into the language of the person that needs the information, that can make a decision on it. Thanks so much for that. Jeffrey, what are your thoughts?
I think everything that people have already said covers the highlights that I usually do. One thing I'll add real quick, kind of, again, I sort of briefly touched on this, but doing a research project, you have some big question, you need to break it down into smaller bite-sized chunks to actually get to the end, right? I wanted to know, what is a typical type 1a supernova? That was a big chunk of my thesis. That's a ridiculously huge question. I had to gather a bunch of data, figure out a little bit of statistics of what are outliers, what are real, what are not, look at different observational features, et cetera, et cetera. And that is a huge skill. It's hard to write that in a resume, but it can be done. You can definitely get at that. And it definitely comes across in interviews of, here's a big vague question. How would you think about it? How would you take steps? What data would you want? What data is important? What data would be nice to have? How do you step through it? What are some issues you see with that? Those are classic sort of interview situations, because that's exactly what a lot of data professionals do day to day. Maybe at the giant companies, you're a little bit more, it's a little bit more prescriptive, and it's like, okay, you're working on this, you're doing this step, then this, then this. But as you get more senior, even in those large companies, you're going to have to be more independent and be able to kind of come up with those bite-sized chunks, those steps, and then execute on them.
It makes sense. And, I just want to clarify, I think you should put on your resume, you are also psychic, Jeffrey, because I honestly was just thinking, and we had not planned this beforehand, that I wanted to ask you about how the interview feels. What is it? How does it actually manifest? What does it look like? What does it sound like? And so you just gave us a taste of it. Eva, Joseph, would you care to share a little bit about what you've seen in interviews so that we can best prepare for them? Who'd like to take it?
So I always tell people, because when you're applying for jobs, you have to be like actors. You have to brace yourself for rejection. Like I think Joseph was in an unusual happy place, but most people spend some time doing this. So in that case, any interview is a fantastic thing to get. I don't care if you don't care about the job too much, if you don't like the location of the job, even if the salary is not. Having interviews as a process to practice essentially is very, very good. For the reason that they vary widely. Some of them are very focused in the technical stuff. Some others really want to look at the more managerial or like interacting aspect of you. Some of them focus on your work style, essentially. So you need to have answers ready for all of those aspects. And some of them have to do with the challenges that you have had. What happened when you were working with a difficult boss? How do you deal with people working under you? Have you trained people? They go into the very technical parts, right? Like they go to statistics or coding or things like that. So my point is the variety is the best. And that's why I encourage people to never say no to even if somebody tells you to apply for a job, it may not be your absolute choice cup of tea, take it. Like if they tell you to apply for it. Because going through the interview process will always be beneficial because it's very wide. So the more variety, the better.
Absolutely. And I agree with you about the practice. I always think of each interview, whether you get the job or not, is a rehearsal. It's sharpening your communication skills, and it's also sharpening your storytelling skills, because that's what you're describing is the ability to take, and it's hilarious because it's such an analog to what you will be doing on the job, but you're taking the raw data about yourself and connecting it with the needs of the employer in real time. And to be able to practice that in advance and have these stories ready to go, that is just power for you. That helps you to actually move forward and get the opportunity. Joseph, what has been your experience with interviews? How have they been balanced in terms of the technical questions that they ask versus the challenge questions or the human behavior type questions?
Yeah, for me, it's been 50-50 in terms of the balance of those. That's for job interviews. And I would want to mention also, like, I agree with that rehearsing, as very important for getting ready for those job interviews. And one way of doing that is lining up informational interviews, which is just like one-on-one with someone who has a position that you want, or someone you can learn from. I started with people I already knew from my network who were reaching out to me when they saw I was in a job search. And then I went on from that to people I didn't know. But that was very helpful for me, even before I had any job interviews last year. And there was one time when I didn't write down enough questions for someone and had that awkward silence. And I learned from that moment, I have to always like spend at least half an hour brainstorming, writing down questions, have at least like 5 questions written down that I could go to at the end of an interview when I have time to ask my questions. And all my interviews from that point on went well. So that one piece of that one learning experience helped me improve the rest of mine. So when then in the interview, when I eventually got hired, it was 1 hour of behavioral questions, including like qualitative data science related questions, and then a 1 hour technical interview where I didn't have to do any coding myself, but I was looking at code and talking through my process, what I would do, answering questions. So that's how it was for me. I know it's not the same for every company, but I'm grateful that it wasn't like a long process of multiple interviews. It was just like 2 back-to-back, 2 hours, and then it was over.
And that helps a lot, right? On the mental well-being to not have 100 emails, not have 100 interviews. The behavioral questions, I just want to clarify that for people in the listening to us today who may not be familiar with that term. Joseph, do you have a definition of that you'd like to share? I have some thoughts if you don't.
No, I don't. Go ahead.
So basically, the idea behind a behavioral interview questions is organizations want to see if you were given a certain stimulus, if you were given a certain set of parameters, how you would respond, what your behavior would be. So if you had a dysfunctional team, how would you manage that situation? If you had a resource poor team, you were trying to accomplish goals, but you didn't have resources to do so, how would you handle that? Let's say you had a mentor or a protege or somebody that you were training who was not listening to you. How did you manage that? So a lot of these questions are hypothetical, but it's very useful to draw on your own experiences and weave into the answer, the stories of what you have done in the past. One of my favorite interview questions for myself, this wasn't data science, but I was interviewed by Intel when I was graduating with my degree in mathematics, and they asked me a whole series of behavioral interview questions about failure and dysfunctional teams. And I talked a little bit about not my job experience, but what I did as the president of the Society of Physics Students and how I had a dysfunctional team and how I managed that. And that got me a job offer. So it's very useful to be able to draw on different experiences that we have. And this relates to a really good question that we already got. We got so many questions. I love this. And we're going to try and get to as many as we can. But Lena Flores, she asks, can you talk more about how you took your various research experiences and learned to translate those skills to be relevant to a business setting? I love this question for many reasons, but one of them is the translation and the communication, the marketing aspect, how do you effectively market yourself? But I also want to take a deeper dive into this. And you mentioned a little earlier, I think it was you, Jeffrey, talking a little bit about how you were talking about your work in astrophysics and how you were able to translate that on your resume. When we're applying for data science jobs in a trucking company, in a tech company, in an X company, they don't know what a GRB is. They don't know necessarily what a supernova means. So we have to be able to say what work we did in our bachelor's, master's, or PhD in a way that they will respond positively, that they'll invite us in for an interview. So with that in mind, I'd love to see who would like to answer this question from Lena about how you took your various research experiences and learned to translate them to be relevant in the business setting. Who'd like to take that one?
I'll go ahead. As a manager, director, I've read probably up to thousands of resumes. I don't know. I have a couple of friends who have kept count of how many resumes they've read, how many interviews they've done, but I've done a fair amount, I would say. And I can tell when it's an academic who hasn't talked to academics who have moved into tech, because it's a 15-page CV and it's got every paper that they're on and it's got their H index prominently at the top, and I basically immediately reject them because that's not a technical or tech industry resume. Tech industry resume is 1 page, maybe 2. I unfortunately don't care about your publication record. I don't care how many Nature papers you've got or what your H index is. And yeah, I do know what a GRB is, but I don't know what mRNA, protein folding, other buzzwords from biotech PhDs are. So, don't use jargon from your academic career. Even the tooling, not just Python is Python or R, SQL, whatever, like fine. But, the tooling of I think about my resume and I was, fitting light curves of supernovae, and I was doing, least squares fitting or other types of modeling. And that's not the data science term. The more data science term is regression. I was doing linear regressions, right? And so it's some of those that sort of jargon translation in the resume, in your LinkedIn profile, which we can talk about that stuff as well, and in how you discuss it when you get to actually talk to a human in any of these interview processes. So there's that basic translation of just like swapping out the terminology. Don't use jargon. You can say star, you can say galaxy, but AGN, no, don't say that. Just call it a galaxy, right? That's good enough for this. If it's an astronomer reading your resume, they might read between the lines or ask you about it, because I always do that. That's always fun to do. But yeah, that kind of basic translation is a pretty easy one. And if you want help on that, you already have 4 contacts right here that you can ping on LinkedIn to say, hey, would you mind looking over my resume and giving some feedback? And you possibly know some people at your institution that have gone in this career path and can give you feedback. Like, I have looked over tons of resumes for people I couldn't hire. Either my team wasn't hiring, they didn't have the right background, whatever, but I gave feedback on a resume, and I think hopefully that helped. I may have given feedback on Joseph's resume originally. I'm not sure. That seems plausible a year and a half ago. So, there's that, I think, is a main thing. And I'm mostly talking about the resume because it is the first step. It's what, gets your foot in the door most of the time. Your LinkedIn information is similarly high up there. And then being able to, like others have said, say those words out loud in an interview setting in that clear, concise, sometimes less technical, certainly not, astronomy jargon way is also important.
Absolutely. Thank you. Eva, do you have any thoughts? How have you translated and made sure that organizations know how valuable you are?
I think he mentioned a very, very important keyword, which is jargon. So, keeping an eye on whether it's webinars or some publications, blogs, Medium, I don't know, all of that contains that jargon. So, when you're applying to places, very much look at either the website or of this place or any blogs that they could exist. All those things will contain this jargon that very often, in the vast majority of the cases, we can translate what we used to do into that specific jargon, whether it's more product jargon or marketing jargon or, money, whatever, things like that. We can translate everything, like time series analysis. That is very used in a lot of data science, for example, and most astronomers will definitely be familiar with that. But just make sure that the words are the correct ones that are being used when you're doing so. Take the time to translate your experience to the specific jargon of the place that you're applying for, the specific industry or the things like that. And I agree with Jeff that, or even with Joseph, I don't know which one of the two said it, that if you know somebody that is working in that industry in a similar place, things like that, friend from undergrad, whoever, somebody's brother-in-law, it absolutely pays off to talk to them, because that's where you acquire a lot of this translation power between your stuff and what is being used in that industry.
Well, and thank you so much for bringing up all the different resources. Like you said, Eva, we absolutely have to research and understand what language they speak if we are going to convert or translate our materials, our resume, our cover letter, even our LinkedIn profile, and certainly prep for our interview into their language. So by reading their blogs, by reading their annual report, by even looking at their social media, by looking at the LinkedIn profiles of employees and leaders in that company, you will start to see how they refer to skills and tasks and problems and solutions. And then if you speak in their language, what you're doing is you're creating a psychological bridge between you and the employer. They are already envisioning you in the role, and that's giving you a huge competitive advantage because, as we've pointed out, so many academics and so many scientists, when they're shifting into industry in particular, only speak in science. They don't speak in the business language of the organization and ecosystem and community that they want to go to. So if you do that, if you speak that language, not only do you honor them, but you give yourself a huge competitive advantage. So really appreciate that point. Joseph, what are your thoughts about translating and really bolstering your opportunities for a career in data science?
Yeah, I think a big one is translating that academic CV to an industry resume. For just starting out without having any data science positions, what you'll probably want to do is use a functional resume template. And with that, you would want to not list that you were like your work experience as graduate student or just that, but you would want to say like data science expertise gained as a graduate student at so-and-so university, to highlight the expertise you gained and what you did in your position that was relevant for the role you're seeking, which you'll probably eliminate some of the things you did that were really cool and valuable, but that aren't relevant. And one thing that I also included on my functional resume was a project section where I did go into a little more technical detail about a few of the projects, not all of the projects that I had done. And that's something that in interviews people wanted to talk about because it looked really interesting. And I don't think I was the best at translating all the jargon at the time, but I was part of the way there, and that certainly helped.
That's so helpful. And you know what, for all of you that are going to stick around, at about 10 minutes of, I'm going to give you a survey that's going to take 30 seconds, but the bonus is you're going to get a free resume template. So that, and you'll be able to download it instantaneously. It is a chronological resume with elements of function. So it has skill sections that really highlight the skills. But I'm so glad you brought up the functional resume, because we often hear, should I do a chronological resume where I list out every job or every experience I had, or should I list the functional, which lists out the skill sets and describes the different problems that I solved under each of those skill sets? It's helpful to hear your perspective. Eva, Jeffrey, what has been your, just a quick question about the resume, which resume format, or is there a hybrid that you have favored and has helped you advance? Eva, take it away.
You want to go first? Okay, I'll take it. So in my case, I've never been to a professional resume checking person, but I've certainly circulated among my peers, mostly colleagues that did the transition before me, and they gave me fantastic pointers. Like this is nobody cares about this part, or write it in this specific way. So the way I do it now, and I've had positive feedback from that. Very short summary on top, like telling your life story of where you started, where you are, where you want to go, type of thing on top. Definitely a list of your skills, very high at the top. Whatever room you have left after, if it's enough room for you to put your specific work experience and in all of it, in all its glory, then good for you. But those elements have to be there. So I want to put a short blurb and the skills on top. And then after that goes education and work experience in my case.
Very helpful.
And keep it to one page, most definitely.
Yeah, Joseph, did you have any other additional thoughts on this?
Like a lot of answers to these questions, it varies wildly. I personally have pretty much only used a chronological resume for my own self, but I've seen very good and very bad resumes that are chronological, that are functional, that are hybrid. Point of personal preference, I think the little summary blurb at the top is a waste of space. I think that stuff should be in the experiences and the projects and all the stuff below. I think it's often just a repeat or fluff, and it takes up white space, and it takes up space that could be used for better stuff. But again, everybody will differ on exactly what they like, what they don't like. This has too dense a text, this has too much white space, whatever. So yeah, even at the point of you're asking, working data scientists to give you feedback on your resume, you'll get conflicting, information. Just like reviewer 1 and reviewer 2 of any paper you've submitted, you're going to get conflicting feedback. So there's that.
I always say with resumes, I always say show your resume to no more than 3 people. So N equals 3, because if N is greater than 3, everybody contradicts themselves.
Yeah.
So then you have no understanding what to do. So I totally your point about that. So we have a really interesting question here from Scott, and it's a relevant question that I get a lot. This question is, do you find your work as a data scientist to be as enjoyable and challenging as your work at astronomy? And I think a lot of times when we're talking with astronomers and other scientists who want to shift away from research careers or away from academic careers, they are concerned. I love astronomy. I love doing science. Will I be sacrificing a piece of my enjoyment to go into this new field? And I'd love to see how all of you have navigated that. Eva, would you like to take it, please?
Yes, I like that question very much, because one point of, again, data, I've talked to dozens of colleagues that have made this transition. I still haven't found one, not one, that has said, I regret my life decisions. Every single person has told me, I found something interesting and rewarding to do. And it's a massive variety of things. Literally, I cannot tell you how big and broad these career paths are for people, but every single one of them has found it very interesting. And I have to say that is also the case for me. And the way I say it sometimes, I use it in interviews, is a data point is a data point. We were trained on we chose to do the ones for stars and galaxies because that's where we were drawn to as students. But a data point is a data point, and it's interesting. There's always insights, and you will always find insights in data, whatever it is. If it's transportation, media, business, it doesn't matter. You will find very interesting things. So again, this is not only my personal experience, that's what I found universally across that people like to do interesting things. It's just boring is the one thing that people don't want to do. If it's a boring, repetitive thing, I think that's where you would find, but normally, for the most part, all of these jobs turn to be interesting.
And they're challenging. So they are still fulfilling your nature to understand nature. That's really interesting to hear. Joseph, what about you? What's been your experience?
Yeah, for me, well, comparing it to my most recent research, when I was in grad school, I was predicting some resonances around Uranus and Neptune, and it's going to be at least 20 years before my predictions are either confirmed or not. And so it's kind of like that work, it was really fun and exciting for me to do, but I feel like it's not really impacting anyone on Earth right now at all. So I enjoyed that a lot. Now in my current work, I would say, sure, my work isn't quite as exciting as what I was doing, but it's impacting a lot of people, and I like that. And that was another step that I wanted to take. I wanted to do something that would impact more people. And so, and I'm learning a lot about programming and statistics and developing myself that way. And that's something I love continuing to learn and that challenge. So I feel fulfilled and kind of along that way instead.
That's so wonderful, Joseph. I'm so happy for you as well. And, it's interesting about the time to market or the time to end user. That is a challenge we have in academic science. As always, academic scholarship in general is knowing that the work that we have is going to have impact, particularly for large members of our community or a large group of community members. But with commercialization, with products within commercialization spaces, within businesses, you have seen that the work that you do today is going to be in a product or going to be in a service for the company that's actually going to influence and impact the end user and or the customer more quickly, it sounds like. And I can see why that would be something of interest, to be able to see, like, I did that and I was able to make that happen. So, and create more safety, in this case, for transportation networks. Jeffrey, what's been your experience?
Yeah, I find the work that I've done super interesting. Basically as interesting as supernova research. I think one thing I can change, like I mentioned earlier, change topics much more quickly if I feel like it. Right. I worked on supernova spectroscopy for 12 some odd years, and then about that. And then worked on TV and movies and media analytics. And then after 5 years of that, switched to Zoom, telecom, telecommunication, video chat kind of stuff, and looking at a wide variety of different companies now in different spaces. So, you can pick super interesting and switch things, which is very cool. In industry, a lot easier than in academia. The other thing, as far as missing astronomy or astronomy data or topics, I still feel pretty fully informed about, at least in the supernova world, between social media and random friends and occasionally poking at the archive, especially on April Fool's Day. I still keep up with stuff, right? I mean, I'm a supernova person. I think within 12 hours of the announcement, my Twitter and Facebook were blowing up of, hey, there's a supernova in M101. Like, that's awesome. And so, I took out my backyard telescope and tried to find it, and have been looking at stuff online. I volunteer at a space and science center doing public observing. I still give public astronomy talks because even though I'm not actively doing research, I still know a lot more astronomy than the vast majority of humanity, just from my training and undergrad and grad classes. And so I still certainly feel connected to that data and to the research and to the excitement of it. And I have this whole other side of, I've given data science public talks and, done funny, events at pubs or movie theaters about big data topics in movies and things like that. So there's a lot of that kind of fun stuff too. Oh, and then the last thing, I'm a scientist. I still consider myself a scientist. I still do research in that I, try to solve open questions that have never been solved before. I haven't published any papers as a working data scientist, but plenty of people do. I've certainly gone to technical data science conferences and given technical talks at conferences. I got a patent as a data scientist, which is pretty cool. I didn't do that as an astronomer. So certainly consider myself, still doing scientific work.
Well, and I love that you've built this unicorn career at the interface of data science and communications and public speaking and astronomy. Like, you're still going to engage that part of your brain and your heart. And it's such a great lesson for all of us that we don't have to necessarily close the door. We can just continue to open the door to the multiverse of possibilities. So that's just wonderful to hear. We got a really interesting question from Amina. She wants to know, what challenges did you face during your career transition? And I love this question because we've been talking about how great it is to be a data scientist. It's so fun, it's so interesting, it's so challenging. But what were the challenges that you faced in the transition? And I'm curious to know of any kind of challenge. Joseph, do you want to start? What have been some of the challenges you faced in your transition?
Yeah, I think there's just so much unknown that you're stepping into, and you don't know what's going to happen. And that, to me, is the biggest challenge, that uncertainty. And I was trying to finish writing my thesis, publish my last paper at the same time as I was in a job search. So juggling all of that in addition to whatever else you do as a human being, that's difficult. But I was able to sort of make a plan where these certain weeks, I'm really focusing more on certain responsibilities, so that the weeks afterwards I can focus more on the job search. And it worked itself out. And I did have an additional offer before the offer I took as a data scientist, and I was ready to accept it too when this recruiter let me know that there was this other possibility as well. And so I would not have been as fulfilled in that other role that I was ready to take. But lots of the roles we take we know they're going to be temporary. And so it might be necessary to take on something temporary that you don't enjoy as much, so that later on you can jump from there to something else that's even better. So that's what I experienced, but I'd like to hear others' experiences as well.
Well, and I'm glad you pointed this out, Joseph, that it's not the job that you take right now or the experience that you take right now. It is not your destiny. It is just one rung on the ladder towards what it is that you want to build for your career. So it does not have to be the extent in your mind. It can be something that can be very helpful to you. But before I go on to Jeffrey and Eva, I just want to quickly ask the panel, We've heard the word recruiter a couple of times today. First of all, how many of you, show of hands, have actually engaged with a recruiter in your career advancement process? Okay. Oh, you all have. All right. So can we just take a quick side? I just want to take a quick side. Tell us what that experience is like. Give us some tips. Should we be reaching out? Should I be spamming recruiters? Should I be sending them texts at 2 o'clock in the morning? Or should I be a little bit more of a chill vibe? How do I manage this? Eva, why don't you take it? And then we can also, I can ask you that question about the challenge of that transition. But share us a little bit
I
about
think I can try to put them together, because part of the issue is that the main challenge that I was going to say is putting your foot through the door. I think once you're allowed to tell your story, your chances increase. I mean, you may still not be the best fit for that particular position, but if you're allowed to tell the story on your own words to a human, chances are much higher that you can do a decent job at that. But getting to that human to listen to your story is the difficult part. And the recruiters are definitely a part of it. Often, it depends on the job, but often a recruiter is the first person that you would talk to at a company. Those will be the ones deciding that if you go to the later stages of interview, for example. So it's very important to learn to speak recruiter language. These people are not specialists, they're not as technically savvy as the people who are trying to hire you and you. So you need to make sure that your language really speaks to this person in the correct level, essentially, to make sure that you go through the next level. And in terms of, I have approached recruiters in like meetings, for example. I attended data science meetings and somebody said they're a true recruiter. Definitely walk up to them and chat them up and make sure that they have your contact information. Like that's definitely, I have not approached them directly like on LinkedIn, but some people have, and that may not be a bad idea. Worst case scenario, they ignore you, but if they listen to you, that may be a way to put your foot through the door. Exactly. So I think almost, and if a recruiter approaches you, definitely engage in the conversation. Worst case scenario, I mean, sometimes they are not very good recruiters and they say like, oh, but I was looking for an engineer. And I'm like, nowhere does it say I'm an engineer. What you're looking is not me, isn't written nowhere in my profile. Like, why are you reaching out? So there's all sorts out there. But I would say that in general, I think that one should learn to talk recruiter. And B, I would advise engaging with recruiters. I wouldn't say most opportunities, not necessarily all of them, but many.
Well, and the recruiters that you've interacted with, it sounds like these are the ones that actually work for the companies versus recruiters or headhunters who work for themselves, who have a
There's
client.
all types. I've also had the other type. So you know, so some of them contact you in LinkedIn and they are more general recruiters. They work for several companies. So all of them are worth at least engaging with at first.
Absolutely. And building the relationship, because maybe the opportunity is not right for you at this moment with the role that they have in mind, but by building and nurturing the relationship, you are giving yourself the opportunity to potentially help them solve a problem, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, in the future, which means they will come back to you for an opportunity, and it's lifelong. If they know you now and you stay connected to them, even as you transition jobs and shift even industries, they will remember you and think of you for a future opportunity. Jeffrey, what has been some of the challenges you've had in transitioning, and tell us a little bit about how you speak recruiter or how you've worked effectively with recruiters.
Yeah, so I first started looking for data science jobs in 2015, which feels like a million years ago at this point. A couple of presidents ago, a global pandemic ago, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say at that point, you know, data science was not super young, but still somewhat new. People were still trying to figure out what that meant and what companies needed it or what they were doing. And so there were some very good resources out there of like, here are the skills I need to learn and how I can attain those and how I can get my foot in the door or get started or look for jobs, but not a ton. And so it felt very overwhelming to me of like, okay, I know a little SQL, I don't know much Python, I don't really know statistics very well because I'm an astronomer, and you know, how do I translate this? How do I make a resume? All those questions, all the stuff we've been talking about, it felt incredibly overwhelming. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know which thing to tackle first. I was still, you know, a research postdoc that was, you know, I had a fellowship, so that was nice, but I still needed to do that work, you know, as well. And so it did feel very overwhelming just to get started, right? And so talking to, you know, a small number of friends that had made the transition or had done stuff certainly helped. going through some of those resources and, making a plan to make a plan, and then making a plan, and then starting to execute that plan of like, okay, I need to bulk up, this skill set, that's what I'm going to work on, or maybe two kind of skills at a time, and, get that going. And then when I felt kind of good, start talking to people, whether it was just direct contacts of mine that are people that hired people and did interviews, and say, hey, throw me some interview questions, and just like, let's do a practice interview or a mock interview. And I straight up bombed a bunch of those. I did well on a couple, but I straight up bombed a bunch. And like, so much so that like I still remember, like, 7-8 years later, like, gosh, I can't believe I gave that answer. That's such like a rookie noob mistake. I can't believe I said that to a friend who knows that I'm a smart person. And so, taking, trying to take a step back, trying to, not let it be too anxiety inducing. Somebody I saw in the Q&A asked about imposter syndrome. That absolutely jumps in here, of like, I'm not a statistician, I'm not a computer programmer, I'm not a industry person, I don't have a real job, I've only been a grad student and postdoc, yada yada yada. So there's definitely that aspect that was very intimidating at the very beginning of that process of even thinking about trying to bulk up skills before I, well before I looked at job descriptions, well before I even, sent in a resume anywhere. So that was sort of the biggest challenge I had, was getting started, not getting too overwhelmed and disheartened early on.
It is a challenge. There is definitely challenges that we face in this transition period, but there are ways to manage it, to navigate it, to reduce the risk, and to increase the opportunity for all of us. I want to give everybody a chance to get that resume template. So if you go to this QR code right now on your phone or on your computer, however way you want it, or you can go to the website talk.ac/Alaina G. Levine, enter the code data, clever, and you will go through just a quick series of prompts very quickly right now, and then you can download that resume template. While you're doing that, I want to give Joseph and Jeffrey a chance to very quickly tell us a little bit about your awesome podcast that you're going to be launching. Who wants to take that, please?
Go for it, Joseph.
Sure. So a little backstory. The past 5 years, we've been doing astronomers turned data scientists meetings at American Astronomical Society meetings. And it's just like a 1-day splinter session, morning and afternoon, where we have people who are both in astronomy still, but have been doing machine learning related projects or have switched to industry, usually data science careers. And we give talks. And so what we've been wanting to do is not have that just be once a year at our annual meeting, but throughout the year to let people tell their stories about how they transitioned from astronomy to data science. So we're in the next few months, hopefully, we'll be launching this podcast, Astronomers Turned Data Scientists, where you can hear other people's stories and learn from that. And so if anyone wants to help or be involved in some way, or if you know any sponsors that would want to help us, let us know, because we're in the process of launching this.
Thank you so much, and congrats, mazel's on this. I think it's going to be such an amazing resource for the community. And if we want to connect with you, of course, we can go onto your LinkedIn. I encourage everybody to connect with all of the panelists today on LinkedIn. I'm going to stop the share, but if you still need the code, just throw it, send it in the chat, and I'll put it in there. I want to give our panelists a chance to give some final thoughts. We have 2 minutes, so 30 seconds each. Or less, more than 30 seconds each. Eva, why don't you tell us, what are your final thoughts, your final piece of advice for us, please?
Don't be discouraged with the current times. The current times, there's an overabundance of people looking for jobs just because of all the layoffs that happen. And I know it can be very frustrating, like Jeff and I are in that process. But, look outside the box. I've been, for example, applying to public jobs lately, and people are interested in us there. So, it depends on what everybody wants, but like, look outside the box and don't be discouraged. We're still very valuable for all of the market out there.
Thank you, Eva. And the value that you provide is just going to get bigger and bigger and more significant given all of the changes that we're having with AI and ML and DL and all of the different innovations. Joseph, what are your final thoughts, please?
Sure. I agree with Eva. Another one is to work on your own projects that are maybe not related to your 9-to-5 work. And you can practice things that you want to learn. And that's a way you can show that you really care about data science. And when in interviews, people are going to want to ask you about these things that you care about because you decided to do it on your own. So that's what I would encourage.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And Jeffrey, what are your thoughts, please?
I've been cruising through the Q&A, and I'm going to try and do some lightning answers real quick just for fun, because that seems interesting. And I would just repeat what Eva and Joseph have already said. So perks or main good reasons to get a job in the tech industry. Even pre-pandemic, you could live where you want to. There are lots of companies in large cities in the US, so you don't have to move if you don't want to. Remote work was a thing. It's a much more prevalent thing post-pandemic. So location is certainly a thing. Salary is certainly a thing. Salaries are more lucrative than academia, that's for sure. That's important for many reasons. Technical conferences and stuff, I've mentioned that. There's a number of conferences that are thrown by sort of platforms and products and companies. And so it's like half actual technical conference and half advertising. So some of those can be interesting. Databricks is one of my personal favorites. I like them a lot. The Data Science Salon is actually one of my favorites. It's a bit more independent, and they kind of rotate through the Bay Area, Austin, New York, some other places maybe. They have a big online community, so I like them a lot. There's a lot of blogs and newsletters that you can sign up for to get new tech and big data and ML and AI news. Let's see, what were some of the other ones? Job descriptions are notoriously vague or notoriously specific. And so by that, I mean, they're so vague that they're trying to catch everybody and you don't really know, okay, do they want a software engineer? Do they want a data scientist? Do they want a machine learning engineer? So that's kind of a bummer. And then sometimes they're so specific. I've literally seen job ads where they're like, you need 7 years experience on this platform, and the platform has only existed for 5 years. So it's physically impossible to check every box in the JD.
So Jeffrey, excuse me, it sounds like there's so many different options here, and there may be some conflicting opportunities and conflicting information, but the bottom line for all of you out there is that if you want to pursue a career in data science, the door is open. The many doors, the many universes are open, and these 3 amazing, talented panelists are here to help you, and I can't wait for your podcast to launch. Joseph, Jeffrey, Eva, thank you so much for your generosity, for your time, and for sharing with us an intimate look into your career. We wish you all of the best. We congratulate all of our panelists and all of you out there. We threw into the chat one more time, if you want to book a resume consult or a one-on-one career consultation with me, you can do that. Connect with us on LinkedIn. And we don't need to wish you good luck in your career exploration in data science, because after all, you are astronomers and astrophysicists and cosmologists. You rule the multiverse, but we will say enjoy your amazing adventures towards your unicorn career. Thank you so much, everyone. This was wonderful. This concludes the podcast.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye.